A lot of the problems that people have with houseplants actually start when you first bring your houseplant home. So we thought we would jump on here live today to go over our 5 tips for what to do when you first bring your houseplants into your house.
So I'm Dan, and this is Kelly.
Hello.
Here at the Frog Pond Veg Patch, and our focus is on easy, no-fuss gardening and tips and tricks, and we like to share everything that we're doing in our garden with you all, and that's why today, since it's cold and snowy outside, we are inside working on our houseplants.
Yeah, winter is really the best time to be focusing on your houseplants, because especially if you do any outdoor gardening, there's not a lot you can do outside, and I really enjoy that. So I like to instead focus on the plants that we bring into the house. One of the things that I know we have struggled with when we first bring plants home is bringing home pests. Bad pests. I'm still dealing with a mealybug infestation from a plant that died about 3 years ago. So one of the first things you want to do when you bring home a plant is actually quarantine it. So for example, this is just, what is this? It's a storage container of some kind. Essentially, you just want something that fits your plant, and you just put the plant in there, put the lid on, and then I would quarantine a new plant for as long as you can handle doing it. At least a week. But some things like mealybugs, they take a little longer to surface. So maybe between a week to 14 days, maybe even as long as a month. This plant has actually been quarantined. Do you know when we bought this? Last summer?
Yeah, it's been some months now. But so I do want to say, so with putting them in the bin and putting like a lid over it like that, so that's going to create kind of a mini greenhouse for it. And during that quarantine period, you're going to want to check on it, often enough just to make sure it's got the, right moisture level. And if it does start to get a little bit dry, you certainly can give it some water. But during that time is when you're going to be checking to see if there are any critters that you're not expecting. This was in quarantine. We have in our basement a plant storage rack that has lighting, and we'll keep things down there when we don't have a spot for them, say in the house, or if we're quarantining them.
You can also just put this anywhere where you have enough light and it's not around other plants. You can put one of those yellow bug sticky tapes in the leaves, just in the soil. Like this has a tag that, pretend that's a yellow sticky thing. And that helps to see if there are things like fungus gnats or other things that are flying around.
Yep.
So this has been quarantined for more than long enough at this point. Poor thing needs some repotting.
Yes.
So that's the other reason we're here today, because I have a lot of neglected houseplants. I mean, this is my spider plant. It needs some love. So, like I said, winter's a great time to do this, because a lot of us who are gardeners are spending a lot of our time out in the garden, and we just, these things get neglected. So the next thing I want to talk about, once you've quarantined your plant and you made sure there's no pests on it, and if you do find pests on it, make sure to clean them off. We use either insecticidal soap or even just diluted dish soap. Try it out on one leaf first and leave it for a week before you use it on the whole plant. But both those things are good for getting off pests. If you have a more severe issue with pests, you can use something like neem oil. Again, you still want to keep it quarantined if you have an issue with that. So let's just assume that we've quarantined our plant for long enough and it's ready to be repotted. So the next thing we need to concern ourselves with is the soil.
Yeah, and so you want to use soil that is specific for indoor houseplants, first of all. So garden soil, whether it's from the store or out in your own yard, isn't a good plan, because you could introduce things that you don't want to. And indoor potting soil is going to have the right balance of moisture control and nutrients that your houseplants are going to need. Now, it does matter exactly what kind of soil that you get for your houseplants, because there are different types. There are just kind of general. There are things like soils more specific, say, to African violets, or soils for things like cacti. And so, again, based on what houseplants you have, you want to tailor to what you're getting for those.
In the past, usually I have not wanted to buy all the separate different types of soil. So I found that African violet soil works for almost everything.
That's true.
If you add some sand and grit to it, it'll also work for cactuses. So if you want to stick to one thing, I would suggest African violet soil. One thing about that is African violets prefer lower nutrient levels. So that's one thing to pay attention to, how you're feeding your plant. When you are working on repotting, you want soil that kind of sticks together. I don't know if you can see that. This is, it's sticking together. When I'm holding it, it's not like, glued together, but I can hold it as a clump for a little bit. But mostly it's not dripping wet. You want the soil to be hydrated, because if it's still dry when you go to pot it up, it's not going to ever really retain any moisture. So you want it to be moist enough that it's going to hold some moisture, but you don't want it to be dripping wet, because it's the same thing that the plant is not going to be able to use up that moisture right away.
Yeah, and when you're repotting a plant,
Paper towel.
sure. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
When you're repotting a plant, the plant's going to go through a little bit of shock.
It's going to pause.
Yeah, and so if the soil's too damp, that shock, as Kelly said, it's not going to be able to take up that moisture, and then you risk having the roots sit in cold, damp soil, and no plant really likes that, and so you could end up making it harder for it to recover from that shock.
So, talking about that, one of the ways to prevent that is to make sure you're using the right size of pot.
Yes.
So, for example, this is a pretty small pot here. It's probably about a 4-inch pot. I think, we're going to check out what the roots look like in a second to see what kind of pot size we want to go into, but you generally don't want to go any more than about 1 inch to 1.5 inches bigger in diameter than the pot that you have. This is also a plastic pot. This is fine. You can use this as just the pot that you put your plant in, and then have it in like a cache pot. It's tucked over there. Oh, this isn't a cache pot.
Yeah. I mean,
so like this. So I would just take this out of here and just take that and drop it right in. So that's one thing that you can do. I like to use terracotta because they breathe a lot better. And it's not so much an issue here in winter, but during summer, the humidity here is really, really high. So I like the plants to be able to breathe a little bit better than they can in the plastic. We're going to be we'll try out that pot there. This is a 4-inch pot. So essentially it'd be going into the same size pot.
Yeah.
But if I grab this one over here, this is a 6-inch pot. Just sink that in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see that. It'll work in a pinch. If the root system looks really good on this, we'll probably use a 6-inch pot. But I wouldn't go any bigger than that. Even if you have like a bigger plant, you want the plant to get some time to grow into that pot before you put it in a really big pot. So, do you want to repot this?
Sure, we can do that.
Let's just pop this out of here. When you're popping a plant out of the container, the first thing you want to look at is to see if there are any roots coming out of the bottom. I'm going to switch the camera.
Yep. And pardon me for ducking out of the scene. There we go.
So the first thing you want to look for is any roots coming out of the bottom, which this one doesn't have. So I think we're actually going to be able to pot this into the same size.
Yep.
And then you want to gently lift it out of here. And then just check the root health. There's some really nice looking roots on here. You're looking for things that are kind of white, a little bit plump, and most importantly, you don't want soil that smells bad. If it smells kind of swampy, that is not a good sign. And you can see here, like the roots are starting to come out. They're just starting to come out a little bit. So this would have grown out of the pot in a little more time, but this is not. If this was really thick with white roots, then I would put it in that bigger pot, but it's not. There's a lot of soil that I can still see here. So I'm just going to knock the soil off of this and put it into the same size pot.
And if you try to put a plant into a pot that's too big, it's counterintuitive because you think, oh, well, I want it to grow. I'm going to give it the space to do that. But they tend to languish in that. Especially a lot of houseplants like to be a little bit more constrained, and they tend to perform better. So that's why you want to, as you pot them up over time, because this won't be the only time you repot your plant. You want to kind of up the size of the pot incrementally, kind of over time. Then.
Yeah, I actually prefer just finding a pot size that works, and then I will remove a lot of the soil from the plant and just keep it in the same size pot. There's actually no rule that says you have to keep sizing up every time. And with the spider plant, I'm going to do exactly that. I'm just going to take the soil off the roots and put it right back in the same pot. The only time I wouldn't do that is if the plant has been having any kind of issue. Like maybe there's been like a fungus issue or something like that. I'd just get a different pot. But most of my houseplants, oh, this has like a little, see, it's actually a good thing to remove some of this soil because this has like a little plug, like a little fabric, here, switch camera, like a little fabric thing around the roots, which probably is not actually helping it.
You can see.
So I'm going to remove that as much as I can just to free up the base of this plant. Because I can see like the root, there's a leaf that's down in the soil and I don't want that. So I'm kind of going down to below that collar of that leaf. And you can see I've shrunk the root ball by about half in here. So I'm just going to size it in the pot. I need about 1 inch of soil underneath there, and then I'm just going to fill in around it. You don't want to pack the soil down too much. The plants need air, water, and nutrients, so they need that air too. You don't want huge pockets, but you don't want it to be very solid. Let's try that a second. And then you want to leave about, say, 1/2 inch to 1 inch at the top. This is going to be about 1/2 inch or so.
Take a little soil out. Yeah.
Yep. And then you can see like these roots are looking pretty good and healthy.
Yeah.
I don't mind how these roots are looking. I've got some roots at the top here. I think that's because it was buried too deep. So this is a good time too, when you're bringing home a new plant, check for things about like whether it's been buried too deep, whether there's like a little plastic collar around it sometimes. You can also sometimes see if there have been pests in the soil. That's when they're going to come out and you'll be able to see those.
Yep.
And I'm just going to, I'm firming it in. I'm not like packing it in really hard, but I am firming it in because I made this kind of like a weird shaped root ball. And I want to make sure to not bury the top of the plant. And I'm just going to scoop off the extra. There we go.
Yeah. So that way the plant won't be swapping the dirt, and then too, when you water it, the water's not, if there's too much soil in it. Can you hold that?
No, I got it.
Okay. If there's too much soil in it, you risk the water just kind of pouring over the top of it as well. So.
Could you get a paper towel to wipe off the outside of this pot? Mm-hmm. So I am going to water it just to settle in the soil, but I don't want to water it a lot. One of the biggest mistakes you can make when you're repotting is really drenching this soil. Remember, this is already moist, so we don't need to drench it. And I'm just going to put a little water in there till it runs out, and then we'll need that plant tray right there. And then just put it in a plant tray.
Which plant tray?
Then the one underneath that
pot. Oh, okay.
Empty pot.
Yeah, because this makes sure, by giving this quick water here, if there were any larger air pockets, it can fill those in and make sure there's good root contact with the soil.
Can you switch cameras again?
Oh, sure. Oops.
So I don't know if you can see here. I'll try to get it really close. You can see there aren't pockets. It's filled in nicely. So that's it's kind of sizing a plant up. I wouldn't have put that root ball into that 6-inch pot. There were not enough roots in there. Again, if you can see soil between the roots, if you can see, say if it's like 75% roots and 25% soil, I'd be okay with putting it in that larger pot. But this was less than 50-50. So I just put it in the same size pot.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at this spider plant that I have sitting over here. I haven't repotted this poor spider plant probably 2 years. So one of the things you notice with this is it's got roots coming out the bottom. I don't know if you can see this. Switch cameras.
Yep.
I just watered it today, so they're a little bit wet looking, but you can see the roots coming out the bottom. This is not the most root-bound spider plant I've ever grown.
But it's definitely time.
Yes, it's definitely time.
It'll be happier.
It'll be difficult to get. There we go.
There you go.
So this one you can see, even though I'm going to pot it in the same size pot. Here, you can switch the camera again. This one is a little more like that. It's heading towards 75% full. You can see all these nice healthy white roots here. That's what you want to see. There's a lot of nice white roots there. But I'm still going to essentially squish all the soil off of this thing. And you can be, with some plants you can be rougher than others. So take a look at the tags when you buy your plants and just kind of go off what they tell you. If they say, doesn't like root disturbance, then what I'm doing right now would be horrible. Don't do that. It would be scarring to the poor plant. But spider plants are tough. They can pretty much take anything. Right in here, they have these rhizomes. Can you switch camera again? They have these rhizomes in here, and these are looking nice and healthy, nice and plump and white. That's exactly what I want to see. And again, I know a spider plant can handle this, so I'm just going to strip off all this soil. This is really old potting soil, so there's no nutrients left in it. It's not doing this plant any favors. I'll get it right down to the core. I would actually, if I had one right now, I actually do, it's on the windowsill, but I'm not going to add another spider plant to this pot, but I could do that too. And one of the reasons I know this needs repotting is it's got these like yellowed leaves on here, and that's a sign that it's not really getting the kind of nutrients that it needs. Alright, so we got it all stripped down. I've pretty much cleaned off all the soil from the roots. As I've been going, I've been feeling like all these rhizomes are really nice and thick. They're very solid. They're not squishy. The soil doesn't smell bad, so this is a really healthy plant. So even though it's been languishing, it's actually really healthy. So I'm feeling really good. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything concerning in the pot. There's no like fungus or mold or anything like that. So again, I would switch pots if there was, but there isn't. So I can just pretty much fill this up and put the plant in as I go.
Yep.
And the soil right now is a little bit drier than I would like, so I'm going to just make sure to water this in nicely and get those rhizomes in there. Spider plants, for me at least, have a tendency to crawl right out of the pot. So I try to keep them down in a little bit. Because those rhizomes, they push the plant right up out of the pot. So it's like going for a walk. So that's looking good.
If you don't put it in your pot, it's going to go out and find one of its own.
Yeah, pretty much. My poor spider plants, they're so neglected.
Oh, yeah.
I just stick them in various places and forget about them. So poor things. Spider plants are really, really tough though. All the spider plants I have are actually pups from my mom's spider plants, which are probably like at least 20 or 30 years old by the time I got pups from them. And these are all about 20 years old at this point. These things go on forever. At one point, I basically cut all the roots off of my spider plants and started them all from the rhizomes. And this is what's resulted. They're still nice. They're healthy. Mm-hmm. This one will be a lot happier once it's got all this soil in here. So this one in particular, because I took all the soil off, I'm just pushing down to make sure there are no air pockets there, and there aren't. That looks good. Can you wipe off the outside of that pot?
Yep.
So when it comes to repotting, a couple of the common issues that you could end up with is having, like we said at the beginning, the wrong type of soil. So this is just a general all-purpose mix for tropical plants. We actually buy this at our local garden center, and it's really good. We rarely have to feed our plants.
Yeah, it's also and we partly we know that because that's the plants we buy from them. They're using that same potting soil, and the plants do really well.
The plants are amazing to get from them. But this cactus over here, this would hate this kind of soil. This is a succulent. It's what is it? Oh.
Wait, pardon my reach.
Let's see. This is Senecio citriformis teardrop. I like to keep a label of some kind with the plant because then, I have a reference to what it is, but I also know sometimes I can look up what are the care requirements, those sorts of things. So if I didn't know what kind of soil I needed, I could look that up. If I was going to use this soil for this plant, I would probably mix in, let's say, 50% sand. Between 25 and 50% sand with this particular soil mix. Just something that's nice and gritty. You want to be able to feel the sand while you're mixing it in there. Because they want some really free draining soil. Another problem that you can end up with is overwatering your plants. So I used to struggle a lot with overwatering and actually chronic underwatering. And I found that one of the best ways to actually tell whether or not your plant needs water is just to pick it up. So when you get a new pot, one of the first things you'll do is, this is a brand new pot, it's clean, just fill it up with dry potting mix and pick that up. And you'll notice that it's pretty light. Then you want to put in potting mix that's the right kind of dampness and pick that up. And then put in potting mix that is completely soaked and pick that up. And you'll notice there's a huge difference between each of those. Actually just noticed with this one, this is wetter than I would like. So I'm going to make sure to pay attention to this one just to make sure that there's no water in the saucer under here. And if there is, I'll take it out later. And that's just by weight. You don't need to do the finger in the soil thing. I found that that is not helpful at all because I've had pots. Are you gonna take that? Okay. I've had pots where the top inch has been nice and dry, ready to be watered. The bottom 2/3 of the pot completely swampy and soaked. So I don't use that at all. I just pick it up. So that's a really good way to make sure that you have the right weight. And you can do that test with any pot that you have that you're new, like that is new to you. I would suggest doing that test just so you can figure out what is the weight of the pot and what's it going to feel like. You just kind of like play with that and learn that.
Yeah, it's a really good way to just quickly, as you're walking past your plants, you can just lift the pot and sometimes like, oh boy, that's really, really light. I need to remember to go water that.
Another thing I've noticed, some plants will actually change color when they need water. Spider plants go blue-green when they're too dry. So some plants will do that. A lot of plants will turn yellow if they are too wet. Another thing you can do is just smell the soil. If it smells like fresh soil, it's good. If it smells like a swamp or like rotting leaves, that's not good. You want to then take the pot out of the soil, take the plant out of the soil, and remove all the soil like I did with this one, and start fresh because you're never going to get the water out of that soil. Over-fertilizing is another issue. I know it sounds like a really good thing to do. You want that plant to be growing fast, but this soil, when you're first repotting, this is really rich soil and has a lot of fertilizer in it to begin with. So I would treat this as your fertilizer for the first month at least, maybe even 2 months, and then get on a regular fertilizing plan after that, which that depends on what plant you're using, what it's going to need.
Yeah, because when we're talking about getting on a schedule with it, knowing how often the plants are going to need food, and that's going to be dependent on the plant and also dependent on the time of year as well, because most of the plants that we keep in our houses, as we get into fall, they start to go a little bit dormant because they're sensitive to the amount of light that there is, and so shorter days they're going to go a little bit more dormant. They're not going to need the fertilizer at that point. It's when the days start getting longer and the plants kind of start waking up a little bit more. That's a good time to, okay, now I can give a little bit of fertilizer, give a feed to everything, and kind of start your schedule back up through the spring and summer again.
That brings up another good point of when to repot. If your time, I always say like the best time to repot is when you have time to do it. So we'll start there.
Yes.
So I've repotted plants all times of year, all the quote unquote wrong times of year. It's fine. What you need to keep in mind is your plant actively growing? So is it going into spring and summer? Or is it actively, like if it's slowing down? So if it's slowing down, if you're going into fall and winter, then I would suggest not bumping the plant up into a larger pot. Instead, I would do what I did with this spider plant, or even with the rubber plant. I would try to take off some of the soil and just freshen some of the soil, because those roots are not going to do a lot of active growing. And if you put it into a bigger pot, it'll have a lot of just soil that just holds on to the moisture that's just going to sit there and kind of keep the plant kind of cold and wet, moldy. It's not really a good place for that plant. The other thing to consider is take a look to see whether or not the plant is thriving versus struggling. So struggling, you'll be noticing signs like maybe it's wilting, it's yellowing leaves, it hasn't grown for a long time. If it's thriving, maybe you notice that it's just starting to bloom. That's not a good time to repot because the plant is doing so well. It's happy, just kind of like let it slide. And then you can repot it after it's done blooming.
That's always a good rule of thumb. If the plant is in a good steady state, leave it be. You want to, because again, as we mentioned, any kind of repotting activity is going to send a little bit of a shock, and so the plant's going to need time to, divert nutrients to kind of recovering from that. So if it's putting out a lot of new growth or flowering, let it continue putting nutrients and its energy into that. Don't add more things on top of that by repotting it.
Some plants thrive with the change up. Some plants kind of just hold out.
Yeah.
The spider plants I found, they tend to thrive even with how beat up I went after that plant. That'll be fine. The rubber plant I'm going to keep an eye on just to make sure that it is still growing well, and just to keep track of, I got to cover that root right there. So after you water it, it's a good time to look to see if there are any roots that have come up, when the soil has settled. There we go, all tucked in. So I'll be keeping a closer eye on that one, just because I don't repot rubber plants all that often. So I have less experience with that. So a lot of it really is just learning about the plants you have and just doing what is going to work best for them. So I think that's it for today. If you have any questions after this stream, feel free to drop those down into the comments down below, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. We'll also be making more videos about houseplants to kind of cover some really, common problems that people have with houseplants. And I think we're going to be trying to do like live streams a bit more often, especially, we probably will have one coming up soon for seed starting, probably sometime in March.
That's getting close.
Yeah.
Alarmingly close.
I haven't even bought seeds yet. I haven't even thought about it. I just realized that last night. I've gotten nothing. And you have some dahlias coming. I know you want to do an unboxing with those.
I'll do an unboxing of the dahlias. So that'll be as we get into May for us where we are. The place that I ordered places. I actually lost track of how many I ordered. They will ship things like dahlias that are obviously sensitive based on when they should go in the ground in your area. So yeah, that'll be like the May time frame, and I'll definitely do a live unboxing because it'll help me remember what I had, what I ordered.
Yeah, so we're going to be incorporating these a little bit more into our channel this year, these live streams, so that we can get a chance to, kind of go over topics and work on things in real time, but also, as we're doing these more often, hopefully you guys will, join in with different comments and questions that you have, and that'll be really helpful for us, too, to know what it is exactly that you need to know from us. So thank you so much for joining us. Make sure, if you're not already subscribed, that you click that subscribe icon down below, and click the bell icon too, so you know when we go live on our channel. Anything else?
I think that's it.
All
I
right.
think we've got a couple plants that are getting much happier now, and I'm happy for that as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching, and
we'll see you next week.